Any depiction of CSAM or child pornography was obviously excluded. Anything that would jeopardize an active federal investigation. And finally, anything that depicts or contain images of death, physical abuse, or injury, also not produced.
Welcome to Gaslit Nation. I am your host, Andrea Chalupa, and this is, of course, our show about corruption in America and rising autocracy worldwide. I am joined by my dear friend, Russian mafia expert Olga Lautman, to talk about the Epstein files. Our opening clip was Deputy Attorney General Todd Blanche during the press conference of the latest batch of release of these massive files. There's about 3 million files released thus far, as ordered by a bipartisan act of Congress signed by the President of the United States, who's all up in these files. I want to remind everyone that Todd Blanche is also convicted felon Donald Trump's former personal defense attorney. So whatever we have seen in these files related to Trump has passed through Donald Trump's former defense attorney. And so keep that in mind. And also keep in mind that the lawyers for the victims are demanding more files be released. They're saying that there's still an ongoing cover-up after decades of cover-up, and that they especially want to know who, other than, of course, Alex Acosta, Donald Trump's former Secretary of Labor during his first term, who specifically was involved in giving predator Epstein such a sweetheart deal where he could have a staycation house arrest and continue to hobnob and be normalized by the world's elite across industries, including academia, media, sports, science, innovation, all of it, and of course, global affairs. Now, I know things are extremely dark and heavy right now. People are basically having their minds broken by what's coming out. I'm getting all sorts of messages from listeners, text messages, phone calls from friends. People are digging into this and finding so many disturbing things about victims, alleged victims as young as babies. I know this is very, very, very hard, and I want everyone to just sit with the fact that these Epstein files finally coming out after decades of cover-up, it's very much a before and after moment. This is really going to stress our sense of self, our sense of country, a sense of like looking around at our institutions, the people who run society, our very relationships, the parties that we vote for, the options on our ballot. This is really a stressful moment, as well as the collective grief we're all feeling for the victims, for ourselves, the fear we feel raising children in this country that allowed this to go on for so long. This is extraordinarily dark and heavy, and it's going to be with us for the rest of our lives. And I would argue it's a good thing that it's finally out in the open and we can name names and we can demand justice and we can do something about this, because there are things that we can do about this. And always keep that in mind as we go through what's going to be even darker and darker days, as more revelations come out, as more journalists and citizen journalists dig through this massive, massive release of files, as the advocates for the victims continue to demand a full release of the Epstein files and not accept, tolerate, normalize any excuses by Donald Trump, convicted felon Donald Trump's DOJ, that includes his former personal defense attorney. Now, I want to just acknowledge the fact that Olga Lautman and I, being Eastern European, and both of us reporting for many years now on Russia's ongoing invasion, genocide of Ukraine, my own background for decades studying some of the very darkest chapters of Soviet history, we are, I want to say, you never really get used to this, but we're sort of battle-hardened and acclimated to confronting some of the darkest, darkest evil that man is capable of. So we will be your guides through this extraordinarily disturbing time and help you make sense of it and help you turn that pain and grief and anger and fear into meaningful action, because that's what this is all about. It's justice for the victims and justice for society to protect us from these predators, name and shame, and get them out of power and refuse to accept any excuses and normalization. That is what this is all about. Now, I think one of the big takeaways of this episode is, number one, just like with the Russia-Trump investigation, as that was slowly building, we all watched that. We documented that here on the show. Olga Lautman documented that in her work. Just like with the Russia investigation, the revelations for the public were like breadcrumbs. It built over time and became increasingly shocking. That's what we're dealing with here. What we know is not as damning as what we don't know yet when it comes to Trump and Epstein and that whole cabal of pedophiles that have hijacked our democracy. That's number one. Number two, when you feel overwhelmed by the millions of documents that have been pumped out there, and you feel like, what is real, what is false? Is this all done to overwhelm us deliberately? Like Steve Bannon said, we've got to flood the zone with shit. And are they sprinkling in a lot of really crazy conspiracy theories to try to turn their opposition, the free press, into the new Pizzagate, the new QAnon? What can we truly believe here? And so Olga and I, once again, with our combined decades of experience in researching and reporting on authoritarian regimes, namely Russia, and of course Russia's links today to the corruption cesspool that has hijacked our democracy in the United States, what we can assure you, how to stay grounded, is this: look for the patterns. Look for the patterns to know what's real. What is being described in these emails among the elite, the callousness, all of it, has already been reported in books, including by investigative journalist Craig Unger, his book, House of Trump, House of Putin, of which Olga was a researcher. And in that book, Craig Unger describes these fancy mega yacht parties where Trump's kleptocrat cronies from countries where he's building Trump towers, developing countries, post-Soviet states where he's building Trump towers, they would get together on yacht parties, have these sex parties where they would fly in virgins, young girls, underage girls that were trafficked deliberately intentionally to supply the oligarchs, the ruling oligarchs. And so what American audiences, what Americans are waking up to in these Epstein files, Olga and I have covered for years in our research and how kleptocracy works. What you're coming across, what's shocking you, what's giving you nightmares now, that is the culture of the ruling oligarch elite. If you don't believe us because we're women and you might have a misogynistic streak, go pick up white male Craig Unger's book, House of Trump, House of Putin. In it, he describes one of the yachts having bar stools made from leather from endangered animals. All right? So that's what we're up against. It's that vile, it's that evil. And so I'm going to stop here and I'm going to let my dear friend Olga comment so far.
Well, I don't know where to begin with all of this. For starters, you said that we can actually, do something about this. For starters, from the emails that we have seen enough evidence besides, the trial to demand that Ghislaine Maxwell get moved back to prison and out of this club, med where she's playing with puppies. So that's the least that we can do, that we can demand it. We can put pressure on Congress to haul in Todd Blanche, Trump's defense attorney, to find out why in the world he decided to move her out of a prison and put her into this basically club that has Pilates and yoga and puppy time. Why was she there? They don't take convicted sex offenders. So why is she sitting there? So for starters, we have work to do, and, we can get justice for the survivors by making sure that Ghislaine Maxwell, who was involved 100% in all of this, gets put back into a normal prison immediately, because there's no excuse for any of this and why she was moved. As far as, with the underage girls, look, I know we're all going to focus on Trump, because he is in power right now, and rightfully so. But frankly, we need to put politics aside when it comes to this, because anyone involved, I don't care if they're a CEO of a company, if they're a president, a former president, a politician in Hollywood, the head of a bank, I don't care who they are. If they raped little kids, little girls and boys, if this is what they did, and we know there are over 1,000 victims, 1,000. If they raped them, first of all, they should be prosecuted. And it is such a shame that this has been going on for from the 1980s, and that we are in 2026, and that we have the Deputy Attorney General, Todd Blanche, coming out and saying, well, there's nothing to see here, after we literally are reading these emails, these FBI reports. Nothing to see here. No, there's no crime in partying with Epstein. And that said, no, there's no investigations, no one will be charged, and that 1,000 kids, 1,000 plus kids were raped and trafficked by just Ghislaine and Epstein. That's it. Is this what we're supposed to believe? So we need to demand that. And luckily we do have, for all the disagreement on everything I have with Thomas Massie, him and Ro Khanna have literally, push for this, and they're continuing to call this a cover-up. So you have 3.5 million pages that came out, hundreds of thousands of videos and photos, and they are still calling this a cover-up and saying that the other 50% that the government is withholding has not come out. And that is the more disturbing, the more, that can prove crimes, and that this is what the government has not released. So can you imagine, with everything that we have read so far, which probably, it just came out a few days ago, with 3.5 million, maybe 1% we saw of this will be of the 3.5 million documents. Can you imagine? The things I've read are frankly disturbing, disgusting. I don't even know how as a society we got this far. And to think that he can come out on a Sunday talk show and say, well, there's nothing to see here, and, just let's move on. Not to mention with Trump. As far as what Trump goes, this is not the first time. You and I grew up in New York. He was, had this reputation way before he stepped into political life, and before, this whole MAGA, whatever this movement stands for, because clearly everything that they claim to stand for when Trump is against it, they suddenly shift. So whether it's Second Amendment, that now they're like, oh no, you're not allowed to carry a gun to a protest, or whether it's, they were all for taking down the elite pedophile ring, and now that there is indeed one, and now they're like, there's nothing to see, let's move on. So before Trump and this MAGA movement in New York, this was well known. The Plaza Hotel on 58th Street. In the 90s, there were reportings that they were holding, having parties, coke-filled parties with underage girls. So for him, this is nothing, absolutely none of this is, new. He himself said he used to walk in on his teen Miss USA, and walk in when the girls were getting changed, and laughed about it. So, I don't understand why half of America decided to, bring back this pedophile when he has himself admitted it. He's admitted what he did to women because he had power on that, the Billy Bush tapes. He's told us what he's done, And now we're seeing the evidence come out. How many times has he been listed? Like 5,000 in these Epstein files. But again, this goes past Trump. This goes past. We need to, as a society, learn that we have to be hands-on and make sure people are held accountable, because it breaks my heart that you have, these survivors, some as early as 1996, who reported this, and were ignored for over a decade. How many more victims were involved over that decade? And the last thing I'll say is, these files came out, on Friday? Over the weekend, there have been several high-level resignations across Europe, with people who appeared in these files, including Slovakia. Like, one of Fico's top people resigned on Saturday, I believe, over this. So you've had several resignations in Europe. Why is it Europeans are holding their people in power accountable, and here we've had 0 resignations? I'd argue that the media is really not even focused on this. I've never seen anything like it. And I understand that they have to be careful and they can't, go through and repeat every single email or file that's unverified. But I mean, the coverage of this dump, of this extensive, horrific trafficking ring that lasted for decades upon decades, where everyone failed. The Department of Justice failed. The FBI failed. I mean, literally, the local police failed. Every single person who was meant to keep these little boys and girls safe failed them. And the media literally spent per hour, maybe 2 minutes, 5 minutes talking about it. That's it. I mean, which is incredible to me, because it feels very much like in Russia, where there's a blackout and it's like, nope, this is something you cannot touch. And who exactly is it that is, making sure that the media doesn't delve into this, doesn't question all of this, doesn't dig through and see, what their own reporting from decades ago matches with the emails. Just like one of the former sisters for decades told us that she went to the FBI and reported this in 1996, I believe. She told us. And then with the first Epstein file release, she saw her report come out and say, you see, it's here. I told you guys, this is what happened. What, the media can't go through and see what their own outlets reported over the past 4 decades to compare and at least see what they have corroborated versus, what came out in this files that was reported to various government agencies. So, I mean, we have a lot of work to do. And it's really sad that this is, only on social media. You go on social media, you see like every other post is about Epstein. You turn on CNN, nothing. You open New York Times, there was one article. Washington Post, nothing. I mean, this is incredible. This is over 1,000 kids. 1,000 kids who were trafficked, who were raped, who were beaten, potentially murdered. 1,000 kids. And this complete, silence coming from legacy media and from politicians who should be pushing for more, who should be hauling every single person into Congress using their power and saying what is going on here, what was released, what isn't released, why were there, based, with Trump and several other people, why were there things released on Friday, and then when you go to compare by Friday night, they're gone. I was shocked to see that it was even Jake Tapper who, on, I believe Friday was when they released it, that he happened to grab screenshots of several things on Trump. And then when he went back into the Department of Justice website, it was wiped out. And these were allegations of Trump raping underage kids. And he put the screenshots and said, I went back into Department of Justice website. This is gone now. Why? You know, we need answers. Why was this never handled over 40 years? Why is there no accountability? Why are Europeans doing a normal job of holding people accountable? They're not waiting for hearings or anything. They're like, you were in the Epstein files, and, I'm tired of hearing I wasn't on the island. Epstein raped people in New York City. Epstein raped people wherever he was. He raped these kids everywhere. This has nothing to do with just one island and whether people flew to that island or not. People could have, like Lutnick, who lived next door to Epstein, and said, oh, he was very creepy and whatever, and claimed that he distanced himself, only to find out now in the files that clearly he continued his relationship with Epstein way past what he said. And the last thing we have, I believe, just in this government right now, if I'm correct, around 30-something people who are in the Epstein files. Why do we have these people in government? Why are they still there? And why did, Slovakia's national, I believe he's a security advisor to Fico, the prime minister, why did he resign? There was nothing that was incredible with Fico. Fico's national security advisor. I mean, the things I've read here are worse. Involving American politicians and people inside the government. Why are they still on a Tuesday, still sitting in power? No one has even written an article about them. Nothing.
It is completely within the realm of possibility, given what we know about these people already, what we've witnessed with our own eyes and ears, that girls, boys, young women, maybe young men, were murdered as part of torture, murder, snuff videos. There's one email of someone whose name is blacked out thanking Epstein for the torture videos. Like, I love the torture video. And when you point that out online, saying things are going to get darker, revelations are going to get darker as we demand and we force more files to be released. When you point out online, like, they probably murdered people. You get these randoms on social media yelling at you and saying, don't make things up. Don't jump to conclusions. There's a lot of claims in these millions of files. Open your eyes and ears of what we've seen already. They're openly murdering people casually on the street. There's a video of Bovino telling his troops in Minnesota, go ahead and do what you need to do. If someone even touches you, that comes from the top. Trump told us, and he was right, when he when he was running in 2016, he said, I could shoot someone on Fifth Avenue and they'd still vote for me. He's correct. He murdered people.
Why he
murdered
that?
people with his insurrection, his violent insurrection that he deliberately incited to try to stay in power on January 6, 2021. He let Elon Musk, who's also a sociopath, who in these emails gleefully could not wait to get to Rape Island with Epstein, telling Epstein, I got to let loose. When's your wildest party coming up? And Epstein's like, well, watch out. Do you really want to bring your wife to this? And sociopath Elon Musk's like, yeah, she doesn't care. When's the wild party? So sociopath Elon Musk had no trouble going into our federal government and doging everyone, where one New York Times investigation did an analysis saying that sociopath Elon Musk's cuts through Doge probably will lead to 3 million deaths around the world. These are mass murderers that we are up against. And so they don't care. They lack empathy. Kristi Noem got her job as head of Homeland Security because she shot her puppy in the face. So I think all of us need to wake up and understand what is the bigger picture here. They probably murdered people. Todd Blanche said, yeah, we withheld we withheld materials that showed any violence and death. You think he said that just because it was a formality? He's covering his bases just in case? Because you really want to give them the benefit of the doubt on this, given what we've seen so far? People need to wake up. That's absolutely what is central to all this. That's why Trump, who has gotten away with so many crimes and corruption, so much corruption before our very eyes, was so desperate to try to cover up the Epstein files. It took a miraculous bipartisan act of Congress, mass-defying his own party, to bring this about. It became unstoppable at a certain point. And Trump had no choice to sign it, or it would have been worse for him. And instead, they hushed up Maxwell by giving her Pilates at a club fed, because she could confirm that people were murdered for the pleasure of these sadistic elites.
Well, and also she knows Trump since the late 80s. At least her father was, friends with Trump, and her father was a very well-known, agent for Mossad and for KGB. He was very close with Khrushchev and helped move some of the stolen $50 billion out of the Soviet Union. So Trump knew her father, and he, as a result, knew her from the 80s. So when she gets this treatment, or when he says, I wish her well, there's a reason he's saying this, because he knows the woman since the 80s. She and Melania were friends. Melania, who arguably comes from this Epstein crop of women, that according to the emails and according to reporting from a decade ago, and according to Epstein himself, he said that he introduced Melania to Trump. And so
they reportedly, according to Michael Wolff, fucked for the first time on Epstein's Lolita Express, which is fitted out to have a bed, and numerous sex crimes were reported on the Lolita Express. And according to Michael Wolff, that's where Melania and Trump had sex for the first time.
And that's another thing. I'm glad you brought him up, because it frankly is shameful how many reporters are caught up in this as having friendly relations with Epstein, as helping him cover things up, how to pitch things for the media, how many wrote puff pieces for him and are like, do you like this? Did this come out good? What the fuck? They knew that he is a monster. They knew. And the fact that they are sitting and helping him. What about Steve Bannon? How many files is he involved in? How many emails, text messages, all the way to the last days of Epstein before he was arguably murdered, or who the hell knows? Honestly, I wouldn't even know where Epstein is or what happened to him. Or
Julie K. Brown, who did the bravest reporting, she just wrote a Substack, which I'll link to in the show notes, saying that Epstein was murdered. And in fact, there was reporting that Epstein's lawyers were working with the feds, flirting around on some sort of cooperation. It was very early in the works, but that door was opening. And then next thing you know, he's found hung in his cell, barely off the ground, when he was supposed to be on suicide watch. So the investigative journalist of the Miami Herald, Julie K. Brown, who gets all the credit for doing the right thing in the media when everyone else failed, Julie K. Brown believes that Epstein was murdered. What do you think of the possibility that victims generally were murdered?
I do think that is very possible. You see it in the emails. And the fact is, you mentioned, the torture video email. Why in the hell is the person who wrote this? Why is his email, his name blacked out? I mean, you have this Department of Justice that exposed many, many victims. And, they were supposed to redact their names, and they failed to do so.
They even
And
included
even
a
worse,
driver's license.
yeah, and even worse, photos. And then you have an email from someone, oh, did you like the torture video? And we don't know who this person is. Why? Why is that redacted? Why is the government protecting who this is? And the one thing, with all the dark, horrific, I can't even imagine what these poor survivors went through, how many didn't survive. The whole thing is like a big nightmare. It really is a big nightmare. And it's something that we, need to deal with in order to fix the future of this country, because we cannot have institutions that we're paying tax money for, that are funded by the taxpayers, involved in, not holding people accountable. And clearly you see, this is not one child that was raped. 1,000+ kids. I'll keep repeating it and repeating it. 1,000+ kids that were raped over a 40-year period, and 2 people were held accountable, Epstein and Maxwell, and we know how many more were involved. But the thing that is missing, interestingly, the finance stuff. Where is all the emails on the money? Because we know that he moved billions and billions and billions and billions of dollars for Russia, for people in the Middle East, for the Saudis. You name it, he moved money for them. We know JP Morgan Chase was involved as far as facilitating the movement of this money, whether they did it knowingly or unwittingly. Where is the movement of money? Where are all the documents related to all the financial transactions? Where are the documents? Because a lot of the financial transactions was just not to move money, but it also involved the sex trafficking ring. Where are these documents? Because everything I've seen are references to snuff films, or people who called in to report that they were raped, of people who gave their experience, whether it was in Epstein's Upper East Side home, whether it was on the island, wherever it was. Like I said, there wasn't one specific place where he raped these kids. Everything I've seen relates to this. Very, 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 very dark stuff, even, with babies being murdered. Where is the financial stuff?
Well, the answer to that is Epstein, Maxwell, they were an intelligence operation. Epstein was Mr. Magic Money Manager, even though he had been fired from Bear Stearns in 1981 for wrongdoing. And yet people are throwing their money at him to manage it. He didn't have his own wealth. He was handling the wealth of the ruling elite. And as you said before, his BFF, his madam, Ghislaine Maxwell, her father was an intelligence asset for both the Kremlin and also Mossad, Israel. And he was a big-time media kingpin in Britain, among the among the power broker class of Great Britain. And he was found mysteriously killed on his boat, I believe, the lady, which he called the Lady Ghislaine. And I think it's important for people to understand the relationship between Russia and Israel. There's a reason why Netanyahu campaigned with a giant billboard the size of the entire side of a building showing Netanyahu shaking hands with Putin. There's a reason why Russia is like the second most spoken language in Israel or something like that. Russia and Israel are close because of the Jackson-Varick Amendment, which allowed in an act of Congress that allowed Russian Jews, like Soviet Jews, to get the hell out thanks to amnesty laws. Olga's here because of it. Her family got the hell out. So that it did a lot of great things. But according to one analyst from the Pentagon, it also allowed the Soviet Union, the Kremlin, to let a lot of Russian intelligence agents out. And they flooded to Brighton Beach. They flooded to the U.S. They linked up with Fred Trump and Donald Trump. They flooded to Israel. And in addition to that, I talked to a major American developer who changed the skyline of Chicago, who said that when he was working on construction projects, development projects of big buildings in Russia in the 1990s, when so many Westerners were flocking to the post-Soviet states during the shock doctrine to build capitalism out of the ashes of communism, this American developer said that he witnessed the rise of the Russian oligarchs. And when he was working on big deals with them, they all were asking him to wire their portion of the payment, their portion of the deal to Israel. So people have to understand, whatever your thoughts are of Israel going back from your grandmother's time, it's been completely hijacked, state captured by Russian intelligence on top of their own xenophobia in that movement driven by Netanyahu and his ruling crew of terrorists there, convicted terrorists like Ben Tavir. But Russian intelligence married together Israel and Russia. And that's where Ghislaine Maxwell and Epstein literally came from. And they pollinated their operation through the ruling elite across society, across industries, and they collected kompromat on people. That allowed them to stay out of trouble for decades. That allowed them to compromise people across both political parties for decades. And so when we're asking, why is something as simple as a name being blacked out on an email to Jeffrey Epstein saying, I love the torture video, why is that name being blacked out? That could be a head of state that is deemed untouchable by U.S. intelligence, by Trump and his inner circle.
Yeah, and to get back to that, I actually spoke with Kalugin years ago, like almost a decade ago, who was a head of counterintelligence for KGB, who actually was involved in asking Andropov to push through and accept this amendment in order for them to send Trojan horses. And he said that they did, for every Soviet Jew, they did infiltrate and send out a lot of KGB agents, both to Israel and United States. And when you actually went through the route like we did, you arrived in Italy and then you had the choice of going to Israel or United States. Thank goodness my parents picked United States. Some people picked Israel. And you see a lot of this back and forth. As far as Mossad and the KGB itself, they've always been rivals because Israel, the KGB, and now the FSB and GRU, they've always supported the Palestinians. They've always supported Hamas, Hezbollah. They've flooded, Palestine with weapons to the terrorist organizations. So let's not get it, wrong. It's not that Russia supports the Palestinians; they support the terrorist groups.
Before to divide and conquer, as a wedge against the West to divide and conquer.
Yep, and they flooded Hamas, Hezbollah, the Palestinian Liberation Front back in the 80s. And 70s. So, this is an old tactic. They've always supported, and provided weapons to whoever was in charge of the Palestinian state, and it should be a state, and the Americans always provided weapons to Israel. So, but with the influx of Soviets, you did have a lot of, infiltration into Israel's intelligence agency. So you have factions who are, loyal to the Kremlin, at that time Soviet Union, and then now towards Russia. And then you have other factions who clearly are not. I mean, we have the same situation here with Tulsi Gabbard. She is very go Russia, go, I'm all for genocide. And then you have other Americans inside of intelligence agencies who understand that Russia is an adversary and not a friend, nor will it ever be a friend of the United States. As far as Epstein, with intelligence agencies, there have been so many claims. You've had intelligence agents from Israel over literally decades ago who said that he was running operations for Mossad. Then you have a lot of crossover with the Russians and with FSB. I personally think that he was a free agent. I think that, he was one. We had the same with Adnan Khashoggi in the 80s, who was an arms trafficker. And same thing, he sold his services. So whether it was, selling his services to one intelligence agency, was selling it to the Soviets, to whoever it was, whoever had the highest price. So I do think that, clearly Epstein was running such a very complex operation, because at the same time, it's not only the horrific, nightmare of young kids being raped, but it is wealthy people in power who are doing the raping and the trafficking. And for that would be a gold mine for any intelligence agency, because then they can, use this kompromat over those people to have them carry out, whichever intelligence agency. Russia's known for this. Russia, domestically used to set up people back in the 80s and 90s, and frankly, forever. Even earlier, the Politburo, and then later on, business people, as the oligarchs were rising in the 90s after the collapse. They used to set them up with underage girls in order to have kompromat on them, and then they expanded by the, I would say, mid-90s to Western officials. They did the same thing prior to the collapse. I mean, I'll never forget that Kalugin, famously said that, in Russia, we basically, our women lie on their back to serve their country, because they had a department within the KGB going back forever where they trained women, KGB operatives, and the same thing continues to this day. They trained women to basically have sex first, like I said, for domestic purposes, to have kompromat over Politburo members, and then it expanded to Westerners, and frankly, to anyone. I mean, it doesn't have to be a Westerner. It could be someone from China, from, wherever, Iran, whatever it is. And they continued this practice. We've seen these honeypots. We've seen, this continuing on over the decades after the collapse of the Soviet Union, when the FSB kind of reconstituted themselves after a few years of chaos, and that's it. So obviously this would be a gold mine for any intelligence agency, for the Russians, for the Israelis, for everyone, to have this information over, of what Epstein was collecting. And again, the money, there is a money trail. He moved tens and tens and tens and tens of billions of dollars. I mean, this money went somewhere. Who knows what it funded? How many of it, the things were legitimate? How many of the things, were not. He moved some money for, enough money for the Russians. He moved money. Ehud Barak comes up a million times.
The former Israeli prime minister was close with Epstein, working on financial deals with Epstein, staying with Epstein in New York. And in Virginia Giuffre said that she was raped by someone who was a former prime minister, former world leader. She was too afraid to say who.
Yeah. Yeah, Ehud Barak, was implicated over the decades, just as, what's his name, Prince Andrew, no longer Prince, because Even the UK has accountability that we seem to lack.
Well, he should be behind bars.
Yeah, well, hopefully he'll be getting there. But I have a feeling that they'll take care of it before we do anything here, because here so far, like I said, there are 30 plus something people named so far in the files who are inside this administration. And guess what? Like, the media hasn't even written about it. I mean, they're not being named. They're not being publicly outed, like, they're being outed via the emails, but not by the media, not by politicians. I mean, these people should have had their resignation on Saturday, along with the Europeans who have spent the weekend resigning, but it's up to us. We need to continue with this. I think that there's going to be more and more that will come out. I think, we'll find out more and more about the cover-up. We already knew with Trump last year, for instance, that he, didn't want these files to come out, and basically had over 1,000 FBI agents sitting and pouring through these files to see what can be withheld. Clearly, this didn't work, but then we saw one memo where the FBI agents over the summer compiled a whole list of accusations, all the credible accusations against people, and Trump was in this list. So we're definitely going to have more information coming out. I'm hoping that Massey and Ro Khanna will continue with this, because they clearly understand, that this is still a cover-up. The survivors are absolutely furious, because they've waited decades and decades to finally, try to get some kind of closure, only to get another slap in the face, and in some cases have, their rape photos put out. Because that the Department of Justice, didn't bother redacting, but they redact the person who asked about the torture video, And so we have a lot more to learn, but the bottom line is that, one lesson to take from all of this is we need to push our government. For too long, we were, too comfortable, up to a decade ago. Too comfortable that the government, and our institutions will save us, and that, we can just basically live a nice, comfortable life in a democracy and complain about things, frankly, that, at that time we should be thanking that we have this, and the past decade since Trump came down, the escalator and basically turned everything upside down, the one thing he did prove is that the institutions will not save us. And the one thing, to give credit to him, not that he did it on purpose, as a result of him, we have discovered the rot inside our institutions, because there is absolutely no society on earth that's, where people actually go to work for government agencies and say, yeah, it's fine. I can go to bed at night knowing that 1,000 plus kids are being raped, and that person should receive a sweetheart deal. And it wasn't just Acosta. I mean, literally all along the way, you saw the failure of every single agency that failed to protect the most vulnerable in our society, and that's our kids. I mean, and as a result, you have 1,000 plus kids who have to live for the rest of their life, with these memories of being raped, of being beaten, of being tortured. And God knows how many did not make it and who were killed, and how many took their own lives because they couldn't live with this and couldn't, move forward. And the fact that as a society we allowed this to happen, and that there is this, class of elite that frankly can get away with anything. And this is not related, but, here you have Elon Musk in 2024, the richest man, who arguably we don't even know, for him all day screaming about undocumented immigrants. He himself came here undocumented. His brother with him on stage admitted that they fraudulently got their, documentation, which I personally don't care about. But, in his case, so if you go on his Twitter, at any moment, you'll see that he's carrying on about undocumented immigrants and that the country needs to be cleansed out of basically all brown people. He spent $230 million to put someone into the White House. And guess what? This man, an elite, is now already putting money into the midterms and has already put in, I believe, 10 million. And this is just the beginning. Like, we need to get these people the fuck out of our politics. They need to be held accountable for what they do. He should not be a monopoly and have every single government contract because he bought the freaking government. I mean, what kind of society is this? This is like Russia. This is what happens there. I mean, I expected there, where the senators in Duma rape little kids and they get away with it and all of this is covered up and no one even questions it or asks about it and that's it. And this is the type of society, or where oligarchs, buy all the media outlets and then the media suddenly shifts, a few decades ago and becomes mouthpieces for the Kremlin. Now we're seeing it here with CBS and with other outlets, Washington Post and others who are moving along that path. Or with the elites who basically put in their governors and all their people into the main defense industry and intelligence services and everywhere to have their own, clans in there. That's what you get from Russia. What the hell are we doing here? And it is up to us. We still have the power of our voice. We still have the power of, our speech. We need to push back and we need to make sure that this never happens again, So with the Epstein thing, it's good that this is getting exposed. We need to keep pushing to make sure everything comes out. And we need to make sure, I don't want to hear we can't prosecute anyone. So 1,000+ kids were raped and no one should be prosecuted for this? I mean, that's an unacceptable answer.
I want to know how many of the victims were murdered. I want to know the number. We have to keep pushing for that. And I know everything that Olga and I are saying, based, once again, on our combined decades of researching kleptocracy, authoritarianism, namely out of Russia. We are used to this. Like Olga just said, this is how Russia's ruling elite operates. Russia is one of the largest child sex trafficking rings in the world. Putin claims he kidnapped 700,000 Ukrainian children from his invasion. Do you think they're giving all of those children warm, cozy beds? They're trafficking those kids for the same reasons you're reading about in these Epstein files. And I'm tired of people out there beating up on the messenger, because when I state just plain facts on social media as I'm doing my research, I'm collecting the links that I'm reading and all in my investigation, and then people start yelling at me because they don't want to accept how dark human nature is. Well, let me tell you, you got to see my film, Mr. Jones, about Stalin's genocide famine in Ukraine. It's dark. It's very dark. And do not yell at the messenger. I know this is breaking a lot of people's brains out there, and they're cannibalizing each other, yelling at each other. People are being cultish when it comes to Democratic leaders. Don't you dare say that Thomas Pritzker, J.B. Pritzker's cousin, was a longtime friend, like family with Epstein, and Virginia Giuffre believes that she was raped by Thomas Pritzker. Don't you dare just state those plain facts. What are you saying, that Pritzker knew all this time and was covering it up? I'm saying we need to know what happened. And I think, at a minimum, Pritzker knew that his cousin was friends with a registered sex offender. I think at a minimum, that's pretty obvious. And you see a lot of names across the political spectrum. You see longtime Ukraine genocide denier Noam Chomsky from the far left buddying up with Epstein. You see Larry Summers, Clinton's secretary treasurer, who I happened to meet at the Aspen Ideas Festival years ago as a young woman. That's creepy. And you see him being close, like trying to get romantic advice about trying to seduce some college girl on campus. So Larry Summers was about to be part of the Democratic Party's Project 2028, their plan for taking back our democracy. That's how central he is to the Democratic Party establishment. You see Steve Tisch, the co-owner of the New York Giants. I know from meeting them, members of the Tisch family are hardcore donors to the Democratic Party. They have Nancy Pelosi on speed dial. I know from meeting them in person here in New York in the 20 years I've lived in New York. I know this. It's in the press. It's out there. And on the list goes. And I'm sure I'm leaving people out. And as Olga said, there's around 40 current members of the Trump administration that were friends with Epstein. His current pick, Trump's current pick to be the Fed chair, to replace Powell this spring, was getting invites, pollinated with that Epstein corruption, trying to lure him into parties. Why did they see him as a target? Howard Lutnick, as we said, was trying to, go on vacation with his family to Epstein's Island. It's an extraordinary, bad nightmare that we're all in. It's Eyes Wide Shut, that Stanley Kubrick film that he didn't even get a chance to finish because he died suddenly. And the rumors still persist to this day that Stanley Kubrick, who famously spoke through visual riddles in his film, and I know this because I'm a filmmaker and I studied his work, Stanley Kubrick was trying to wake people up with Eyes Wide Shut, and then he died mysteriously while fighting with the studio over the final cut of that film. And because he wanted it to out everyone. Guess what? Whether you believe in that conspiracy theory or not, Stanley Kubrick his point was accurate. He had a point. They were having sex parties. The New York Times reported in 2016 that there were these calendar girl parties at Mar-a-Lago featuring Trump and Epstein. And now you have in these Epstein files a witness claiming that there were these calendar girl parties at Mar-a-Lago featuring Trump and Epstein. Oh, and Ivanka and Jared were there too. The Trump sons were there too. And on the list goes. And allegedly at one of these parties, Trump would, they would, as the New York Times also reported, young girls would be procured for them. But according to the claim in the Epstein files, those young girls would have their vulvas measured on stage. They'd be selected. That's why they called them calendar girl parties. Virginia Giuffre was working at Mar-a-Lago when she got recruited to be a sex slave. She wrote in her memoir that she thought that she was going to die a sex slave. There was also a claim by one witness that they saw Robin Leach, the host of Lifestyles of the Rich and Famous, who had cameos in films that I grew up watching as a kid, Troop Beverly Hills and She-Devil. One witness claims that they saw Robin Leach at a party strangling a young girl. And Trump's head of security then threatened this witness saying, "Do you want to be fertilizer on the golf course like the others that dare to speak out? Like the other cunts?" He used the C word. These are people who, according to Andrew McCabe at the FBI, upon meeting Trump came across as a mafia boss. And as we've long said on Gaslit Nation, as Olga Lautman's work has long said, think of the election of Donald Trump coming to power, as a marriage between the Russian mafia in the East and the Russian mafia in the West. It's a mafia operation. What does the mafia do? They kill people. They kill witnesses. They get rid of the bodies. So my big question to you all, for those who have the guts, those who have the moral courage to confront it, because that's the only way we're getting out of this is by confronting the truth. How many victims were murdered for the pleasure of these sadistic, filthy rich? Thank you so much for listening. The discussion continues on Patreon, and if you want to dive deeper, join with me and other Gaslit Nation listeners at our Monday salons at 4 p.m. Eastern. There we share strategies and you can go behind the scenes with us. You can get your invitation to that at patreon.com/gaslit. Thank you to everyone who supports the show. We could not make Gaslit Nation without you. And if you value our independent journalism in these difficult times, be sure to subscribe, comment, and share this video. It really does help us make an impact. And I will see you in the next episode or at Monday's Salon. Until then, don't just watch, organize. Gaslit Nation would like to thank our supporters at the producer level on Patreon and higher: Jans Alstrup Rasmussen, Katie Masuris, Ann Bertino, David East, Dawn Rossiter, Deborah Schiff, Diana Gallagher, D.L. Singfield, Ice Bear is Defiant, James D. Leonard, Jared Lombardo, Joe Darcy, Kevin Gannon, Kristen Custer, Larry Gasson, Leah Campbell, Leo Chalupa, Lily Wachowski, Marcus J. Trent, Mark, Nicole Spear, Randall Brewer, Sherry Escobar, Todd, Dan, Milo, and Hubby. Work for better, prep for trouble. Ruth Ann Harnish, and Tanya Chalupa. Thank you all so much for your support of the show. We could not make Gaslit Nation without you.